Welcome to Knowledge and Proclamation. Today I'm going to be speaking about Jesus being God. Oftentimes we'll hear people contend with the Christian doctrine that Jesus is God. Many body of believers will challenge the existence of the Trinity. And so today we're going to focus on the portion of the Trinity that is concerned with Jesus and his deity. So follow me as I begin. We're going to work through the existence of God on to how he is communicated in the Old Testament scriptures, and then how that is connected to Jesus Christ himself. So when we're speaking about God, we can take a look at ourselves, and each one of us are human beings. And so when we ask ourselves, where do we come from? We can point to our parents. If you exist, then I can pretty surely conclude that your parents existed. And if your parents exist, I can pretty surely conclude that your grandparents existed. And so you can see that each one of us, our being, our life, is what they say is contingent on another's being and life. And so even as I'm speaking, you can see where this conclusion is leading to. Every human being, every person that has life, that life is contingent upon another being, another life. And we go on and on back into history until we get to a being that has being within itself. Until we get to a being that has life within itself. We Christians understand this being as what we call God. God is the source of life. God is the source of all being. None of us can be if there is not first a sense of being. There is no life if there is not a source of life, a being that has life within itself. And this is how God has communicated life and being to all humans. It was R.C. Sproul that said, we really aren't human beings because we are always changing. We are always in a state of change, and so we are never in a state of just being. Right now, as I'm speaking, I'm getting older as the seconds go by. Right now, as I'm speaking, I may have eaten before, and so my body is digesting food for energy, for muscles and bones. I am constantly in a state of change. And this led R.C. Sproul to describe human beings as actually being human becomings, because they are constantly changing. And so as we move back to the source of all being, that source of being has to be unchanging to communicate being to humans. The source of life within God is unchanging and never ending, and it is communicated to humans. And so this understanding of change and being and life, the source of all these things, we understand to be God. Now God, communicating himself to the writers of the Old Testament, gives himself the covenant name Yahweh. Now this can be understood as the one who exists, the one who is. This is why we use the term I am. So when we see that the covenant name of God in the Old Testament, God is communicating that he does exist. I am. He constantly is. One philosopher jokingly put it, God is the definition of is. And so what we see is that God communicates himself to the Old Testament writers as Yahweh, the I am, the one that exists, the one that is, the source of all being. God is unchanging. God is constant being, pure actuality with no potentiality. So God communicates himself with his covenant name of Yahweh, which best describes himself as the one who is, the great I am. And after the Old Testament writers, we see, and early in the Old Testament, we see Jesus show up on the scene. And specifically in the Gospel of John, 7 times he communicates himself to the people around him with this same terminology of I am. Now it's important to know that the Old Testament is written mainly in Greek, and so when we see these instances of Jesus explaining himself to be I am, he's using 2 different ways of communicating I am. In Greek, you can use the word ego or eimi, and these 2 words both mean I am. But what's unique about these moments where Jesus is describing himself as I am is he uses both the terms. Now, Jesus may have spoken Aramaic and obviously not in Greek, so he's not using both the terms, but the New Testament writers are using both the terms. Why? Because they're trying to communicate something different this time about the way Jesus is using the term I am. And so what we see in this Greek translation, they use both the terms, ego, eimi. It's almost like I am. They're emphasizing the point that this is not the normal I am that Jesus is talking about. This is not the normal use of the word I am, a description of being. This is a different use of being. This is the same use of being and terminology as the term Yahweh in the Old Testament. Literally, Jesus, when he's using these statements, he is saying, I am God. And you see that then he adds a descriptor. He's saying, I am God, the bread of life. I am God, the light of the world. I am God, the door. I am God, the good shepherd. I am God, the resurrection and the life. I am God, the way, the truth, and the life. When Jesus uses these statements, he is literally saying, I am Yahweh of the Old Testament. So you might say to me, well, why should I think that Jesus is really saying that he is God? Well, it's easy to see because you look at the reaction of the people around him. They rent their clothes, they rip their clothes, or they would pick up stones ready to stone him. They would literally freak out when he used these terms. Jesus walks amongst the religious leaders, and he's saying that Abraham rejoiced to see his day. Now, the religious leaders look to themselves and they say, what is this man talking about? We know where he's from. We know his mother. This man is a carpenter. And how in the world did Abraham see his day? Jesus, knowing their thoughts, knowing what they're saying, looks at them and says, before Abraham was, ego, eimi, I am. The emphasis given that I am Yahweh. Before Abraham was, I am Yahweh, the eternal one, the one that is, the one of absolute being. So I often wonder why many people will say that Jesus never claimed to be God. Clearly, he's claiming to be God. Not only God, but the God of the Old Testament. And not only is he claiming to be God, the people around him give proof of this because they want to stone him. They want to kill him. The penalty for blasphemy is death. And clearly you see the religious leaders around him wanting to kill him. So we see that God is the ultimate source of being, the one with absolute being, the one with being within himself, the one with life within himself. He communicates himself to the Old Testament writers as I am, the one who exists. And then we see Jesus showing up on the scene, claiming to be that same I am, the one who exists eternally before the foundation of the earth. Now the writer of John goes on to, in many other places, to show that Jesus is in fact God. Jesus is working simultaneously with his Father, making himself equal to his Father in John chapter 5. Jesus is from heaven in John chapter 6. Jesus judges together with God. And we also see that Jesus says that he and the Father is one. I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. If you have seen the Father, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. All of these sayings, you see Jesus continually referencing himself with God and making himself equal to God. Jesus in John chapter 3 says that he is from heaven. He is above all, and he actually speaks the words of God that have been given directly to him. Jesus makes no mistakes about it, no allusions to it. He doesn't beat around the bush. He is telling everyone around him that he is God in the flesh. Emmanuel, God with us. He has showed up on the scene in our human time, space, and material reality. And we see that clearly, especially in the Gospel of John. So, the next time you ever hear someone that is doubting the deity of Jesus, take them to the Gospel of John. And make sure you point out that John says there's so many more things Jesus had done during his time on earth, but the ones that John recorded are specifically written there so that you might believe, and that in believing you would have salvation. John wants you to know that Jesus is God, and that believing in him will bring salvation. Thank you for listening to Knowledge and Proclamation. Please go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you would like to see more of these videos. Also, go to our blog and subscribe there, and every time we upload new content, you will get an email. Thank you again for watching Knowledge and Proclamation.